you've been talking to lots of people, doing lots of interviews, and this may be just another one of these, but I do hope we're going to be able to have an opportunity to talk in such a way that when people go upstairs, they're going to have real sense of what they're going to go and look at and see. It's absolutely wonderful to welcome you to the Hepworth, which is a beloved museum and a very precious jewel in our particular region. We are very fortunate to have one named after one of the major sculptors of the 20th century, and I can't think of a more suitable environment than this environment to welcome your work to Britain. There has been an exhibition in Ireland, but this is the first UK retrospective, so we're a very privileged group of people to be able to study it here and to try and have, and the museum is, I think, a wonderfully hospitable place to your sculptural imagination. There seems to be a lovely fit between the spaces that they've offered you and how they allow your work to breathe, to occupy the space and to do what they want to say. So the usual format of these kinds of talks is to sort of take you way, way back into the past and ask you to walk us through your career. And I don't want to do that. There are other ways that we can do it, because what we've got upstairs is an ensemble of the work. And we want to get to the sense of how you understand the kind of the logic or the consistency within them. So we will talk about origins at some point, but the first thing I want to talk about is your dog.
Oh, good. Because I saw that, I said, my dog, she's not here. She's usually with me.
And there's a lot of photographs of you.
And she was accepted to come here. She had an English passport.
But it's obviously a very important relationship you have with this dog. The dog is called Pi, is that right?
P.I. Yes.
P.I. or P.I.? Not Pi.
Not E on the end of
No, but
P.I.
Okay, but you call it?
Pi.
Pi, okay, so this is a mathematical dog. No.
Well, we all can be mathematical if we can be described that way. Yes, we all can be, if we want to be, you know.
But given the very famous photographs of you, I thought this would be a different way to introduce something about your relationship with other species and other life forms, and we wish the dog were here. But now we'll go on to something slightly different, which is, I wonder if you could talk a bit about what you're doing at the present, because the other fact of all these kind of introductory conversations is that we drag you back 30, 40 years, etc., but you're still an extremely productive artist. And I couldn't quite track you down to have a pre-conversation with you, because one moment you're in your Santa Fe studio, another moment you're working on a next exhibition. So maybe you could just talk to us a little bit about what your concerns are at the moment. What are you working on now?
Well, Pi's still there. Shall we take her off?
Okay, I moved on. Okay, we've come to...
There you go. Oh, back up.
Okay, I have to keep...
She insisted. Because this piece is also here in the exhibition. And when I did these more buoyant pieces, I feel that the pieces kind of breathe, almost as an accordion. You would play them. And I found that because I had a relationship with Pi, and before that Oscar, two dachshunds, Oscar I finally left in India because he began to bite everybody. He didn't like to travel anymore. He bit everybody, and finally including me, when my partner Anand, who lived in India, was leaving, and he must have thought when we had a flat tire when Anand was going to the airport that we were going to leave him there, and I was trying to put him in the Jeep, and he bit me finally. But Pi is a girl, and she doesn't seem to be as aggressive and biting, but the issue of the pet and the animal in relationship to my pieces, I think, is there, because I realized that the kind of the bodies, the dachshund, or just this form, somehow was important to me in a very symbolic way, in that, well, this is very strange, but when I was little, I dreamt that I had the choices of going I was served in an oven, wrapped, And I would go through this long tunnel of many doors on either side. And I could open any door I wanted, and then it would be a different dream. And I don't know how I had this idea, but this was the way I kind of began my night dreaming for many years, it seemed to me. I mean, it's very strange, but these people that put me in were kind of like dogs. They kind of long face and they kind of like mole people. But that's, and then I learned that there were all kinds of reasons for these kinds of images later. But I did have a kind of feeling about being safe, being bound, and swaddling clothes and so forth. And the Dakshin somehow got me back to that human animalistic association with my work. And these kind of buoyant forms are kind of breathing. And I think of them as being vase-like when they were going through different changes. So there she is there in my office studio, which is very crowded. She's used to posing. She's used to being with me. And this is the first time I've left her in another country. But anyway, no, I think when I first went to Ireland to look at the space, I left her in Spain and they took care of her. But I have traveled with her. These are paper pieces, and again, they're vase-like, or I've been making paper in my studio in the desert. And I consider them paintings. In the lower left-hand corner, there's a piece of a painting, and I didn't understand why I was doing these brushstroke paintings in this way. But essentially, that seemed to be about 4 brushstrokes wide or drawing wide. Spatially, they were on a square, and I did them both in wax and in crayon markings. Then I understood that I began to make these round pieces. So essentially what I was doing was unwrapping the body, so to speak, and marking. I was just doing an exercise of marks of different colors. And I chose unusual colors. I chose dark and light and value changes. I seem to use gold a lot because of the reflective qualities. I like metal. I like flat plaster. In this case, this is all the paper itself. I'm making a wire underneath. I'm making shapes. They're sculptural. There's some of these pieces. I think there's 3 of them on the wall. This particular space here is a very human one in all the galleries here. And I found what was most interesting is the quality of the light coming through and the fact that it seemed to emphasize not only the architecture and yourself breathing and moving in the space, but it emphasized the weight and the non-weight of the sculpture. I'd never seen it quite so clearly as I have here experienced it, this sort of weight and non-weight. And probably it has to do with the idea of so many flotation areas, the colors and the use of black, the floating ceilings, the fact that you do have natural light, the windows, everything seems to be kind of perfectly in its right space. So I'm so happy that the curators did not overcrowd this, the show.
Can I take us a little bit further? I mean, if you push on...
There you go. There's another one.
Just examples of these.
Okay. Another one. So this, you have quite a few. So I did this one. Let's see. There. Gold inside and paint. So I'm painting them sometime totally in the round.
These take me to the next question from the present, as it were, which is, I must confess that I did deep research in order to engage in this conversation, which is I took myself to Louisiana in order to get a sense of that background. So can I talk a little bit about the question of places in your work? So of course, just in case you don't know where Louisiana is, it is a southern state in the United States, had been French, then became Spanish, then became American. And you were born in Lake Charles,
Yes.
okay, which is a waterside city in western Louisiana. And it is very fascinating, this, anybody who goes there, the relationship of structures and water and fluidity and flatness. It's a very peculiar, particular landscape with a number of things. You then studied in New Orleans. This is the college which was part of the very distinguished Tulane University, which is in the Garden District, which is another very striking mixture of structures and spaces and natural forms. You talk in other places of growing up near and around the bayou, this particular feature of the landscape of Louisiana, and also the infamous or very famous live oaks. And I just wonder, is there some particular sense of this natural landscape or also the cultural landscape of Louisiana that you feel you carry with you? Is something part of your history of a Greek ancestry and visits to Greece, part of the sculptural, this play with light and colour and surface and forms? Is this something that you could talk about a little?
Well, I have to say, I was 11 years old when I first came to Castellorzo, and this is an island where my grandparents on my father's side were born. So I'm half Coastal region, so to speak, but this was a city-state. These are city-states in the Dodecanese. Dodeca means 12. This was the 13th island in this area, and it was a strategically located island all through history. It was an island where you see at the top, that's the castle there, and it's part of the Crusades. So essentially, all of Europe went through this area, and the English, if you saw the guns of Navarone, there's a map of this island, the shape of this island as they were planning to get the Germans out of Rhodos, where Rhodos is kind of a capital of the islands, and Castellorzo is supposed to answer to Rhodos, and Rhodos is supposed to answer to Athens, but it doesn't work that way. The Greeks are very independent-minded, and it just never quite worked that way. But the Greeks are, and particularly this island, and the people who remained there were about 200 for 30, 40 years. But my having been 11 and with my grandmother, I wanted always to go back, and we never went back, but I began to go back and finally I brought my parents there because I thought my father should see where his family was from. But it's right next to Turkey, only a mile, so to speak, with the Turkish islands and the Greek islands, and it's the land of Turkey. So Greeks were living in Turkey, and Turks were living on this island, and you can see the mosque top there, which is now a Greek museum, the red, which used to have the Turkish symbol there. And a lot of the houses are still empty, but that actually all of Europe has come there, and Australians that were Greek and that married some of the English, and they came back and began to paint the houses, and the Italians have owned after the war, the Italians were also, pre-war were there, came in and owned in the 30s. And some of the architecture is Italian, not this particular photograph, but a couple of very large and wealthy families now use this place as their Riviera, so to speak, from Italy.
But does it play any part in your formation, do you think, these different landscapes that are so specific?
Where there's the rocks there, I coming from a very flat, bayou, muddy area, I was very touched by the rocks. I'd never seen rocks. And I began to see caves, phosphorescent caves, and that reminded me of the oak trees, and that reminded me of nature. And we went to also other places, and I saw rocks, and so I began to think of landscape, hills, and I began to think of how the body felt, the buoyancy one felt in the water. I was very attracted to the water. But the scale of this place is so unusual. Children, I know, since I was only 11, feel very safe here, and my grandmother let me run around with this little boy my age, and we were jumping on the rocks in the sea, and we ate all the creatures of the sea because the sea was so clean. So this is a very special place, and I photographed at that time with my brownie camera my grandmother in front of the house, so I vowed to go back there, and I did go back there and claim the house, and I still try to get there. Haven't this year, but every year just to experience it.
So can I take us a little bit from this sense of space and place and the sort of sculptural imagination? Since the early 20th century, Yorkshire particularly has played a part in the history of modernism, particularly through both Barbara Hepworth, more so than Henry Moore. But I wonder, in the terms of abstraction that this museum represents and you bequeath, do you consider yourself an abstract artist, and do you see your work as changing and developing the potential for abstraction now into the 21st century? And do you think it's still a vital language for artists, particularly since so many artists now have sort of abandoned the kind of questions that are pursued through form and abstraction for media and new media and performance and so forth?
That's a very interesting question, because abstraction, I think, may mean something a little differently to me, because I think of having just sort of contemplated what Barbara Hepworth is doing, her line, her sense of surface and line, it was like bringing to it a kind of a plainer sense, and the organic wasn't quite so insistent. But I feel as though maybe my more recent things are developing a sense of, I think maybe I'm more involved with flesh and matter, the material itself, bringing forth the sense of its own life in relationship to the drawing. When I looked at today the Cairo, I mean, it was again planar, but I think it's a very sophisticated sense of the planar. And first it was in the furniture sense, and I had understood, okay, he was very involved with the painters and the American painters, Greenbergian painters that were involved with the edge of the canvas and drawing. And I think at that time maybe drawing and the planar aspects of drawing in sculpture were very important. The Henry Moore I saw today, the kind of bone element, I mean, that was a kind of full bone, kind of fleshy thing. It was like he blew up the bone, and so there's something kind of flesh and bone and that maybe existed in that particular Moore, which was great. The island of the Hepworths here, her models, her huge models, and the wing piece, I think those are about the most elegant sculptures I've ever seen. And they really as instruments, they really play some music there. So they're really not very related, Moore and Hepworth, at all. So that was interesting.
Okay, well, let me take you up on this question of your being concerned with materials and flesh, because I think it's clear to anybody who meets your work that materials are not only the means, but they're a kind of vocabulary. You're in a perpetual conversation with the actual materials that you're using, and you have said that when talking about the beginning of the paintings, the fallen paintings, that you'll see the ones upstairs that are paintings that have taken to the floor, as it were, that you were concerned with moving painting on but you weren't interested in the sort of gestural tradition. It was more watching what materials could do
Within the context.
within that particular context.
There's some accident, but I have control.
You have some, exactly. So I wonder if you could talk a bit, because you've used such a range of materials. People upstairs will see wax, new industrial and rather dangerous materials like polyurethanes, less dangerous latex, but metals, lead, bronze, stainless steel, ceramics, glass, water. And I would almost say space is one of your materials. And I don't know if you would agree, but maybe you could talk a little bit about material. There's this sense of material in your work and why you might locate yourself more in that sense.
Well, I feel our bodies, our sensory perceptions, that's a material that I deal with the material in the context. So I feel I'm at one with the material, as Pollock might have said, or as any artist says. But I think contextually, I live in my time. They lived in their time. See, I think the painting on the left was not successful. It was a marbleized painting, and I only made 2 of them. I destroyed the rest. I remember Saul LeWitt, I traded one, he gave me a lot of drawings, and there were mistakes, so I'd make an X through them, and it was just funny. But I gave him a mistake too, essentially. I didn't make an X through it. I thought, well, I'll destroy the rest of them. I just realized I gave him a mistake. But then I kind of continued to build these textures up and made them, I guess, just carried them into another kind of phenomenon, another kind of image through overpainting, you could say. So the issues of whether you overpaint something or not were not my concerns, because there were all kinds of moral concerns and issues. I mean, yes, I could make a bad work, and maybe I did destroy it. In fact, I destroyed so many paintings just to keep warm. I didn't have any heat in my studio, so I'd burn my wax paintings like that, just throw them in the fireplace and burn them. And I'd keep making the loss and shape. I enjoyed making it, sanding the back of it with the 1x2s, and I seemed attracted to my 1x2s, even now in the heels. And I'm doing a large sculpture over 20 feet by 20 feet by 20 feet. I thought it was 27 by 27, but I guess I was doing the angles because it was kind of this kind of trapezoidal shape. Now, as we speak, I'm making a mold, and it's going to be a phosphorescent piece. I mentioned phosphorus earlier because of the caves, and also diving in the caves. You have this kind of buoyant feeling. And I noticed when I started scuba diving that this buoyancy, this feeling of buoyancy, was what I felt when I made my work. There's no up or down. And then I remember Greenberg and the whole thing, taking Pollock and turning up, or Morris Lewis, is this painting up or down? And, this whole issue of what's right, how do you see things? Well, there is kind of no up or down sometime with my work, because I keep turning it around. But then finally, I do kind of depend on the gravitational pull. And
well, let's just move then to seriously gravitational pull. Could you talk a little bit to the question of fallen paintings? Because I've introduced you as a sculptor. We've talked about the sculptural imagination. We were situating you in relation to the sculptural tradition, etc. But some of this work has a structure, but now we've got painting of some kind on the floor, but no support, soft materials that then become hard. They are fundamentally color. They're day glow injected into latex and other materials, etc. So are you a kind of a painter or a sculptor, or are you someone who wishes to breach the limits and find a form that
there's no
emerges from
limit.
this?
There's no limit. I don't believe in particular contexts anymore, because we're different animals now. I mean, we're really changing with the media. I don't know if we're going to be thinking the same way someday because of all the media. But I can say that I actually primitively stirred the pigments into latex rubber, which was a natural rubber from Liberia. And I remember the Rubber Bureau magazine, somebody from Washington, he looked like Humphrey Bogart, and he called me. And he gave me some free rubber. And I said, "Are you from the CIA?" And he never would tell me. But then I found, I used the rubber and I pigmented it. And so I was grateful for it, and did a little piece. And they photographed me, so I was the cover of the Rubber Bureau and magazine. They were showing an all-American girl, and, So...
There's a terrible joke on the way to coming on that one.
Yeah, I know. Go ahead. No, I know. We won't go there. Okay, so the idea of this was very much like I realized when I did the marbleized mistake, so to speak, that I had to pour. So some of my pours were very marbleized. It was okay to have that because you could read them by walking around them. I started waxing the linoleum and they moved faster. Or I would wax the floor and that would slow down the move. So depending where I did the work, but I did these large pieces in other people's studio because I just wanted to do a large piece. The Whitney Museum asked me to be in the show. I suggested that when this was too large and I had to roll it up and take it out again because they were beginning to put it partly on a ramp because there was no room. The show was called, I didn't know this, I was invited to the show, called Anti-Illusion. They decided to call this process show Anti-Illusion. They were categorizing it even more tightly. So then they did a ramp and I said, I can't show it like that. I've made it. And even here, I thought it's very strange in Ohio at the opening of this new museum. They had it. I didn't go there. They had it half on one color floor and half on another. But I found that kind of strange because it was so large. But I did offer for the Whitney to do it in situ. And I think at that time, I realized I had not enough. This is much later that it was shown there. But I had not enough experience as a woman in the category of doing whatever categories that were being created. And I was involved with the categories that had not been created. In other words, I was riding my feminist wave and deciding contextually that what was being done was too tight for me. Couldn't fit in those uniforms.
That's a great phrase. That's a great phrase. So if we go to another kind of poured pigment, now using polyurethane, again exploring material. There's something interesting in these works where you have a sense of a pour, but also they harden and become now, they are layered and they're creating a shape and a structure of sort of more sculptural form. Right, they have more of a volume.
Well, that was a semi-flexible foam I was still involved with. Okay, I can roll up the large ones. And these are flexible, so I can kind of get them out of the doorway. Mm-hmm. And then I later just decided, okay, it's not if I'm not able to just do them in situ, I'll do them so large I'll have to take them and destroy them. That's what I had to do, and then I couldn't wear art on my sleeve anymore, so I began destroying the work afterwards. The MIT show, because nobody had the room to store work then. I mean, had it been stored, it's ridiculous what the one piece that somebody they sold, one of the first phosphorescent pieces in Kansas. Then 3 dealers got together and they decided they'd cast it, which they didn't understand. I was furious. I said, you don't understand the work at all. They wanted to cast it and sell it. And then they even talked about selling that piece. I said, you're crazy. You don't understand at all that you can't do these kind of things. Finally, they got one of the pieces back that they had you know, the person that paid for my being there and the material, that's all I got, was my trip and the material, you know, gave it back. But it was so dirty that it didn't glow anymore because there was dirt all over it. I suppose it could be, you know, cleaned, but I haven't gotten that far yet.
Well, tell us a bit about this piece then, which...
That was, yeah.
And there is a sort of...
That was before the wings. That was after my first show. Clement Greenberg came up. I remember the show at Paula's in New York, which was at 100 Prince Street. And I actually started pouring in the corners and around the corners and so forth there, in the corners. And Greenberg, there was one piece that I pulled out from the wall, which is a different color piece. And the elevator opened, and I remember I was just happened to be sitting behind the desk watching the area. He came up, scratched his head, because I did everything that he said to do, basically. You know, I was pouring. He couldn't turn it upside down.
Right.
But he scratched his head. I saw that, and if I had had a movie picture of that, it was just great. He scratched his head because it said everything that he was ever talking about, and he couldn't turn it upside down, you know. And I thought that was so funny. And I didn't want to say, hello, I'm the artist. I just, because I would have laughed in his face, and I knew that would have been the worst thing I could have done. And I didn't have that kind of ego, you know.
Let me take you beyond that to these kind of works where you're just beginning to talk about, when you talk about the wing. If we've taken the paintings off the wall and then now on the floor, they're fallen paintings, but then also there's this poured sculptures. These fascinate me because we'll find, and you'll see upstairs, there's things that are sculptures in some sense, but they're on the wall. Right? You know, sculptures usually sit on the floor or on a pedestal or something, but you have done something extraordinary with that. Now, there's obviously built by using frames and, you know, underneath these pours, but then they take on now an existence in space. Could you talk a little bit about
But this was the first wing that I did, and it was in my friend's studio across the hallway. And as I said, and he kept it, and I did these in situ pieces in Germany. The one you saw prior to that was done for the museum, and my first commission for a museum in Fort Worth, Dallas, Fort Worth. So this one later, after doing one more in Germany and after doing a whole group of works there, the dealer didn't understand that he couldn't take the piece that was around a corner. He put it down in Gallery House in Cologne, which was a building that he had bought 2 floors. He was from southern Germany. And I had learned later that one of the pieces was saved, but because he didn't understand what the work was about, I was so furious. I said, you must destroy everything. You don't understand. And he was so afraid. He did destroy everything except one piece, and that piece was traded by a very famous German that he dealt with and saved. So I got a Guggenheim, and with this money, I began to cast this one, the lead one, and Come. All of those pieces. Come was the first piece that I cast. That's why I call it Come. I went from L.A. I was working in L.A. during that time, had my own studio. I was invited to Cal Arts because of the feminist movement. Miriam Shapiro and Judy Chicago and the fellow that was head of the department there said to me, and this is kind of how it was then, he said, Lynda Benglis, you're the one we need there because you're really doing something, as if all women did was complain, you know, and that's what he felt, you know. But, you know, it was going on, and I thought, this is very exciting. I just, you know, was doing the work off the wall and so forth. So I was getting the Guggenheim about the same time. So this was after the fact, this piece, but, you know, it was already a year or 2 later. So I cast this finally.
Okay, and we get this
and
kind
ate
of...
meat.
Then
Okay, so,
this is similar sorts of things, which are, again, a challenge.
yes. Well, all these pieces, you know, I felt when I got the Guggenheim, okay, these are relics already. They were 2 and 3 years old. So it was kind of a relic of the process of the, you know, institute. That was at Vassar, that one. Lynda Benglis had me do it.
Okay, I'll go back to that one. Okay.
That was one of the, then I went to my studio and did these kind of totem pieces, of which you have the two that I did in sparkles, and then I knew I would go into knots. I'd thought
Let's talk
about
about
knots
knots.
before, yes.
The question I'm going to put to you here in relation to this, because I've got a few things I'm going to run through while maybe you're answering this, which is, it would be possible for us then to sort of look at your work in terms of series, because you're engaged now, you're going to engage for a while with knots, you know, then there are the pleats, there are various different kinds of work, etc. Do you see your work as in series?
A language.
A language in which you...
Maybe a language.
A language? Or is it the same problem that you're trying to work out?
It's the same problems.
Through different things. So maybe
Same problems. It's just kind of a language, a different expression.
So if the person didn't get the work and did something wrong with it, but what is the sense that you have that is the central issue that you're exploring through these different procedures, materials, and in some sense series of questions? So knotting...
Well, the body language, the feeling of form,
you
the
said
feeling of breathing, thinking, nodding, you know, I mean...
But is this just, because sometimes you've called these knots as if they're portraits. They have some...
They are.
They are.
Well...
Perhaps...
Well, sometime I've noticed that I'll do something thinking of someone after I do it, or maybe they're around me or something, and then that person will usually recognize themselves. They'll like that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people do have a sense about themselves, or we have a sense about each other that we can express in different ways. I just really think that there's feeling about things that you can intuit.
Okay, let me move to another group of works. These are more of these. The torsos. So just giving people a sense of some of the series of which there are representations upstairs. So it's very clear from what you've said in answer to several questions, the question of the body is the central problematic that you're particularly exploring. But also what I noticed when going around the exhibition upstairs, which is, if I show you this in a slide, it looks beautifully finished. There's the luminousness of the gold, etc. But when you get close up to it, you make sure I can see that it's built on chicken wire, that somebody's had to make this. This is not kind of sparkly and glittery and commodified and manufactured. There's a kind of artisanal sort of functionality behind it. This is how it's built. And you see that even in the knots, the cloth is very visible, that the structure is there. Could you talk a little bit about this kind of almost this tension about creating things that look like, you know, beautifully cast golden objects, but actually have this nice or accessible material procedure behind them?
Well, I keep trying to find a way of doing something that I feel, and I don't particularly feel that way now. I feel a different way now, and it seems to be kind of clumsy for me to look at old work. I feel it's very clumsy. Mm-hmm. So, because I feel that I've been through that, it's like I'm taking a few walks, and maybe now I'm running, but physically I'm not running, I know that. But, you know, I feel, well, I'm getting the same, with the same kind of, and it all takes the same effort, whether I do something really large or really small or really slick or not. It just feels like, okay, I've been through that, I know that, why do I want to go back? But I keep repeating the same damn thing, but in a different way.
Well, it does seem to be quite different when you see the material formation, the materials.
Well, I'm kind of surprised, too, that I did those, because I wouldn't do it today, you know.
Okay.
So I don't understand why I do anything, quite frankly. It just keep myself busy.
But these,
I hate doing it. You know?
why do you keep doing it then?
I don't know. I don't know. I'm just, you're making me feel very badly now.
That is not the intention, Lynda. The
No,
intention
I
is-
know.
Okay, but I just want to give people a sense of the number of, and this is
Oh,
obviously
this is like jelly. That's why I thought this is very interesting. These are crystals. And they did something very strange on the wall with the light.
Okay, so another bit of it. So we also get that you actually have been working in ceramics and clay
Glass. And,
in different places, and we have.
That's in New Zealand. I did a lot of glass, also just in New York. But
Because I showed very briefly a picture of the formations of Santa Fe, the houses in Santa Fe, these incredible adobe houses, etc. And I wondered if you have a ceramic studio in Santa Fe and a metal studio in London and in New York, and
well,
paper. You work in paper when you're in India. Is there a relationship to the places?
well, I worked in paper, and then now I'm working in paper in New Mexico. I brought the paper there. But the glass, I mean, now the plastic, you see the graces in there. I found a material that looks like glass, and it's not purple. It's just that you have the lights that are yellow. So it looks like purple. But if you saw it in another light, it would look a different color. But because of the different refractive indexes of the glass. This has sand. I left the sand. I did actually a drawing in the sand. And because of space-age gloves that they actually wear in space, I was able to take it and tie it. I do a big U like that, a W. And then I bring it through like that with broomsticks and everything. I need several people to help me hold and, balance it heavy, put it in the annealing oven, very hot. But I could do it and manage it because of technology. It's a very simple thing. So.
One of the things that you're going to shortly have is a major exhibition
Of the
fountains, and
in Storm King.
In Storm King.
The gentleman is here.
He's
going to sleep, though. I've got to kick him.
I'm sorry, okay.
Yeah, well, it's his second day here, 48 hours.
To me, this does evoke something distilled of the Louisiana landscape. Could you talk about
I was very lucky to get that was part of a grant, I think.
Commission.
It was a commission.
With the New Orleans.
That's right. So I had the vision of it 2 years before that. I'd set up at the foundry, and then I got a bad cold. Something happened. And then I didn't get a commission in New Jersey. Somebody else that had worked at the foundry, artist there, who was running the foundry, got it. So, but then maybe I had, in between, I think, I did get the World's Fair Commission. That was it. And that was my first sculpture in bronze. So it just felt so pent up that I just said it was my first in the round sculpture. And still today, recently, I was looking at it, and I was amazed that I did it, you see, because it was just, it came out of me. So...
Let me show them a few more. I think I've got some...
Oh, so then the remains of the material, I did this one. It should have a little more, it was kind of, the angle wasn't quite right on this, but it should be, and it kind of made me upset. But anyway, when I saw the Dublin Museum pool there, I knew that I should take that work, cast it 3 more times, because they had a spout like that. So the spout itself was part of it, and these pieces came into the center. So that worked out, because then it went up and down, and then these pieces are just dripping. So it looks like a kind of dance between the real water and the bronze and the water coming down from the interior of these bronze cantilevers. So this is much smaller, 9.5, and then the others are like 17.5-foot cantilevers.
I think we've got another view of the wave of the world.
That's the other view. So recently, what I did was, it was borrowed from, it was shown at the World's Fair, a winner of the fountain contest, and then it was taken out of the World's Fair, and in the haste of taking it out, they forgot the top of the piece that hid the valves. So I had to remake one. I saw it when it was shown in Monte Carlo, and they wanted it in front of their gambling casinos, and the person that had taken it, so to speak, didn't want to give it up. So then later I negotiated with the town that was a suburb of New Orleans to borrow it in order to fix it. But in that way of my fixing it, that I could take a mold of it and change it because I wanted to change it. Because it was such a kind of exact classic piece, was classic. I wanted to just push it a little over the edge, make it a more Mannerist kind of thing. So I just have done that. And I'm casting it, and I was pleased with what happened, and I will probably show it at Storm King.
I'm going to move on because time is running out,
Yes,
and we can begin to see
these
things.
are the colored pieces, and this is the ceramic, and this is how I make it. I have to prop it up because I'm really pushing the clay as far as you can go. Continue, this is an earlier one.
I hope we've begun to give people some sense of what I've called your sculptural practice and your what are the issues, etc. In the final part of the show, we come back to the question of performance in a particular way. And here we have a very famous series of photographs of the pause.
Where'd you get those?
Well, some
That's
of them.
Henry Gozinski, Life magazine.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
and some
they
of them
were
are
all-
provided for you, but etc. But I think it gives us a sense of process.
Yeah, that actually.
And then
Yeah.
we are going to get another photograph of what it takes to work with some of
That's
these
the
materials.
Walker Museum.
Yep.
Yeah.
So these are very interesting and obviously produce works. But I do want to ask you one question. This is a purely art historical piece
Yes.
of things because there's several of us in this room
Yes.
who are passionate about certain artists and have struggled to keep them visible. Did you know about the Ernst Haas photographs of Helen Frankenthaler at work? And is there any relationship between this, something you could see that was happening in what she was doing here, that contributed to not only what you then were going to do with pouring?
Where was that?
Well, these were 1969. These
Where was this taken, though?
This was in her studio. There's a very famous series of photographs of Helen Frankenthaler making a work on the floor. But I was very struck, and there is a Helen Frankenthaler, but you do have a piece called Odelis Kehe Frankenthaler.
Actually,
And I
that
just
was my
wanted you to
first
talk
latex painting, yes. And actually, I have to say, when I was a little girl, my mother collected magazines. I actually had the magazine of Pollock, and then later the chimpanzee doing the same thing, and all the questions. And I thought to myself, what is this about? You know, I was 13, 14. Throwing out her magazines, she was furious with me. They're all over the place in a big box, and they're just going like that. And so, you know, that was a no-no what I did. So I knew about Greenberg. I was very involved with reading about these rules, and I was very involved with logic. So I did that piece, and then I think somebody wanted both of us to have a conversation. She refused.
Frankenthaler.
I'd already been in Life magazine. She refused. So I figured she didn't want to cross that border, whatever it was. But I met Joan Mitchell. Mm-hmm. And Joan Mitchell was also very defensive. But then she had Mike Goldberg as a lover, and, you know. So, you know, but I liked Joan. And I thought, I mean, for my taste, Joan, was more than Frankenthaler. But I really liked the idea, obviously. So I was kind of challenging her in a way, because that was why I entitled it that, you know.
So there was
Odalisque is the real title.
Yeah, Odalisque brackets,
Yeah.
hey, hey, Frankenthaler.
Yeah.
But I just thought it was fascinating. This,
Yes.
Not to put everybody in genealogies
No,
and descent,
no.
but what seeing somebody else's work does
No, I
to
would have
suddenly
liked to have met her.
enable
I
you.
would have liked to have had
The
just
conversation.
a conversation. But I think everyone is so protective, and even at that time, my own peers, whatever sexes, were very protective. I remember going into Eva Hess's studio, asking her, well, she's palling around with Louette and Carl Andre at the same time. And I saw her crossing the street with Carl Andre. Carl Andre was one of the first people in my studio. I said, what is it you feel about this and that? I went to her studio. She said, well, I feel a certain way about Carl, but I don't feel the same way about Louette, because when I was in Louette's studio, he would ask me to come before 12 o'clock noon. Then he would tell me, then she would call exactly at 12. And I said, and he was like this. Yes, you know, like this. I said, who was that? Eva Hess, she always calls. I don't have anybody call me before 12, but he had me visit him before 12. You see, so he does what he wants to do before 12. Then he takes them. So everybody had their kind of rules. And it seemed to me, nobody would do that today. But everybody was very...
Partly because the art world was quite small. And very intense and
very intense.
Competitive.
And Eva had all her ex-husband who had a show with something with wheels, and she had all his clothes in a box on the stairway. So, you know, we kind of, you know, I mean, things were moving, shifting quickly.
Well, I want to just bring us back to the body.
Yes.
And indeed to a much more kind of intense moment in the 70s. So I promised people we would kind of move backwards from the present. And clearly we're now into New York in the 60s and 70s. But in the excerpt, I'm just showing you this particular piece. But also you did a series of advertisements for your shows using photographs which evoke here, obviously, the traditional Greek costume. You're wearing a boy's costume, a Greek young boy's costume. This wonderful photograph of you with your Porsche. We have, I think, the little model of the Porsche upstairs. And, of course, the famous take on the Betty Grable pin-up. I'm only going to show this bit of it. Sorry, I'm showing... No, I'm just... Oh, okay. There's the Porsche, okay. But I'm only going to show you this bit because I'm interested in the gaze in this bit as you talk about it, but also the famous dildo that you hold against yourself. So the famous scene that some of you will not know, that was a scandalous moment in which Lynda took out an advertisement. She wanted to put her work, these sort of posed performative photographs, into the art forum, and the editor, John Copland's, refused to have it, but you were allowed, in a sense, to spend your own money on buying an advertisement space. If any of you go to look for November 1974 Art Forum, you will not find that page because it's been torn out of probably 500 copies of it in every library. But what I'm very interested in is what you were doing there, but that it's taken to be an image of you putting a male appendage upon yourself, but because this is a double-ended dildo, which has its own kind of irony, it fits into a whole sort of playfulness, which you find also in Louise Bourgeois. Let's sort of deflate something which seems to be so powerful. What can we do with it? But it's not that you're adding a male member to yourself, because this already has a kind of invitation to a certain partnership, a sexual partnership. So what I wanted to talk about is not the scandal and the hoo-ha that's been documented, but what does it mean to you now to look back at the sense of sexuality, the body, making your place as a sculptor in New York at the time, and this sort of iconic work and this iconic image, this question of performativity, was that something that you felt compelled to do, to make a place for yourself at that time? Do you see what I'm getting at? Some kind of, I'm not so much interested in all the fallout from it, but it seems to be part of a sequencing of engagements with the body, which also come when we go to your work in video, which is also brings us back to this question of the body, tactility, sensuality, in a radically different way.
I suppose now you could see it as I was trying to make a place for myself, but I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it as trying to level out things. I felt I was riding a wave. I felt I had to comment on that wave. I felt that I didn't feel like going to meetings. I felt as though I had to kind of carry a torch for the situation. It was a humanist issue. I wanted to go about my work. I didn't want to have to say anything or do anything, and then I felt compelled to do it, and I said, oh, what the hell, let me go all the way. We'll have a dog finally do all the things that should be done about equalizing the sexual situation, and the dog can have a lot of say in the matter because it can sing and dance, and it can talk, and it thinks. So I was just kind of...
So there is a doggy theme, you see, all of this talk.
There's a doggy theme there.
Anyway, I wonder if it's time to open up to some kind of to questions from the audience, because I hope we've given you some sense of the wit, the humour, and the creativity of
the
Lynda Benglis.
absurdness of life. I'm quitting now.
No, we just showed the doing. Okay.
I apologize. I never have said that in public, or never have even thought of saying it, but I'm having fun.
Did we have a first question?
Well, that was absolutely fantastic, I have to say. I'm looking forward to spending some time. I'm a volunteer here and sharing, with the people that come in. My knowledge now of what is going on and what you've been doing is really enhanced. It's purely a technical question about casting in bronze. Don't be offended when I ask you this, but you don't cast the bronze yourself, do you? You have a team with you, and you obviously supervise what they're doing. Is that correct?
Oh yes, I make the forms. I have a hands-on with the idea of the form. Yeah. I care about that.
Yes.
And even before I was, or as I was also thinking about casting in bronze, I was also doing metallizing. And you see quite a few of the metallized pieces here over the cloth, because I felt that was a better way of freezing the situation in more detail, specifically with the knots. And then I had understood as I worked it through, and I didn't know why I didn't think of it sooner, I just did metal on metal, and I saw, and Barbara Hepworth was also thinking the same way with the wing piece, that's a drawing. She did it first in wood, and then she decided to go into the aluminum, which could be bent into the curve, and then she got a plane that could be bent, and she drew on the things that she did with sculpt metal, and they were drawings, and they were very vulnerable in a sense, and that sculpt metal is very toxic, because I also worked in it, and I did several pieces that were not in cloth before I started metallizing, and then I metallized over them. And anyway, it was a way to get to whatever you wanted and draw.
I have to say, the range of work and the techniques is very fantastic. It really is. I mean, I've only seen it briefly, but wonderful, and I'm looking forward to spending quite a bit of time looking and the techniques and the forms.
Well, I'd like to push the envelope, as you were saying earlier. I'd like to push it as far as I can go in terms of the material, And even where I am, and they take the most recent artist, in Walla Walla now, where I am now, we're really pushing to do something that nobody's ever done. I want to float a piece in phosphorescence over some water. The illusion of this kind of hills and clouds, it's called. I want to float that over water. Now that may finally should be an indoor piece, you know, but I think at least I should try it to do it in this way. I mean, all the phosphorescent pieces that were indoors, usually they had the vapor lighting and intense lighting and then it would go off. And what I found that was interesting is that it would go like this and then like this, like what you know about gravity, and then at the top it would go like that. So that was a phenomena that really happens and displaces our sense of gravity and who we are and how we see. But I just wanted to do it for the landscape for now. But I think it should be an indoor piece, you know, because of preservation.
Can I just finish? But I was going to say, what comes across is the fun element, really.
What?
The fun element.
Well, the fun houses in New Orleans,
that's right.
was very influenced by these kind of
thanks
planes that went through and
thanks very much,
came out at you, you know, and all different colors and phosphorescent pieces. I mean, I love Guy Fawkes Day, for instance, or Halloween, and, you know, all these wonderful Mardi Gras, you know. Everybody likes costumes.
Okay,
you know, it's fun.
Thank you.
Got some 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds and 18-year-olds, and they're all just starting their art exams.
Stand up.
They're all just starting their art exams. And keeping going for as long as you have and still being motivated is one thing. What is that nugget of advice that got you started, that is the thing I can take back and go, this is how you go from it just being one of the many things you do to the thing that then is you continue for the rest of your life?
Well, I'll quote a philosopher, know thyself. Just, you know, find out what you like to do and do it.
Do you think your background from Louisiana has influenced your work?
Definitely. Definitely, my travels, definitely. Or I've gone there and stayed there. Definitely. I feel even being here, it has to not only to do with landscape, it has to do with energy and how energy comes to you and motivates you to care about the world. I think we all need vacations. This is a vacation for me, you know. We all need to go out in the world to feel refreshed. You know, it's a matter of just refreshment.
But there's just, if I could just add something to that, which I just think one of the questions I had, which was I was so struck that you have studios in different places that are such distinctive parts of the globe. We haven't mentioned India. We haven't mentioned the space of India as part and parcel of the, you know, there's the Greece and Louisiana and New Mexico, New York and India. I mean, these are...
They're all on faults, you know, faulty. I kind of looked at it and I thought, well, you know, any of them could have a huge earthquake anytime. And I thought, what is that about? I mean, really.
Mm-hmm. But then also the association of, Ahmedabad with Gandhi, with the paper, with history. These are not just natural places, but they've got them so burdened.
No,
anyway,
it's definitely But I think people are drawn to places where there's boiling, toil
tension.
and.
Yeah. Okay. Can you stand up, maybe?
You've worked with so many materials and kind of really... Sorry.
Stand up.
You've worked with so many materials and really pushed what you can do with them and then produced sculptures that people really love to look at. Are there any further materials that you'd like to explore still? Is there anything that you really want to work with?
I'm sure, yeah, some I can't afford. Like, it would be great to take just gold, planes of gold, like tinfoil or something like that, and just be able to work with it, wouldn't it? Yeah. Everybody thinks so. I think there's a lot of play in everybody.
You mentioned about gold, another element, which is that I was invited by my friend Mary Kelly, the artist lives in Los Angeles. Her son married into the Greek Orthodox Church, and so he went to a Greek Orthodox wedding, which was a wonderful experience. And I noticed you mentioned that to do with the red and the gold and another kind of gorgeousness that breaks out of the, everything has to be cool, downplayed. So do you feel that these resources like Mardi Gras in Louisiana, or what you saw in India, which is, just extraordinary in terms of the intensity of colour, I mean, people are unafraid of colour, and then, of course, you mentioned the gold. Do you feel you were empowered by these things that you were exposed to some sort of challenge a certain kind of waspish culture in the United States that's disowns its own richness in that way?
Well, I had a contrast. I had a mother that had a minister father, Presbyterian, and there's no imagery in that. And I lived with that family, my grandparents, and would go to church, and he looked like Abraham Lincoln, and his pulpit is in what seems as though it's a museum now, in a church he established in southern middle Mississippi, and he was the first minister to start this little church. It's historic now. There's 4 others, 5 others, and their pictures are there. And then I had this Greek grandmother that we had to have to go all the way from Lake Charles, Louisiana, to Port Arthur, or to have a Easter ceremony. And we had these eggs that she dyed with beetroot, and they went very purple. And we did the egg thing and we had money in the knotted bread, and coins. And when I went to Greece, it seemed a whole other thing. She said, "Be very careful, don't talk to anybody, gypsies will take you." That was the first thing I was looking for gypsy to take me. It was such fun. Going to Castellorzo, going to Turkey, and buying wooden shoes. They were still wearing wooden shoes in the Fez, and the weddings. I mean, she had a wedding coat which was all gold. I mean, just a coat, gold braided and velvet, and these things were
part of it.
Part of it. Just such a contrast.
Lynda, sorry. We had a lovely email this afternoon to the gallery from a student who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, but she asked me if I could relay the question on her behalf. So she's, as part of her research, she said she would have liked to have asked you how you feel your work was related to the sense of touch.
Well, I definitely, when I got into clay again, firstly I did the clay over a wire structure, and I cut the clay, big blocks of clay, very quickly, and made a support over wire and plastic. In other words, the thing underneath was a sculpture already. And then what I did was make a skin over that, but like a puzzle. But I had to make the puzzle active, so I drew with the puzzle and cut it very quickly, and with my fingers mashed it into the plaster structure that I'd created, and it was structure so that it could take the pressure of my fingers, just pounding it against whatever I had created. So what I was doing was making a kind of skin or a puzzle on top of the form. But it looks like a form because of the high elite texture and the fact that the skin kind of moves in space. I call them migrating ped marks, as if I were some kind of prehistoric monster, or I had understood that there was a path to go, piecing it out and putting it together. So very much I wanted my hands into it. But then I took a mold, cast it. People saw it and thought it was ceramic, because I wanted that immediacy. And I thought of my hands making the path. So it was almost mocking the handmade element, which was very processed. I mean, deliberately processed. So I have a kind of sense of irony about what I'm doing, and humor, but also dead serious in terms of form. I mean, I really question how I'm doing it, why I'm doing it, and how we think of it, and what we feel when we see it in the context. So it's sometimes very complicated.
I think this question...
Did you want to ask?
I did, but I have to go.
Well, just say it, say it.
I was
You're too
wondering
beautiful
if
tonight.
to know if you ever wrote, because there's such a narrative too in your sculpture.
Well, I want you to do it.
Oh,
We're all going to get together and do
Come see
it.
in India. Yeah. You need another trip. Okay. Take care.
Okay, I'm just going to make one comment, which I think what you've just said is really crucial about, and it's written in great letters in my notebook, this question of irony, of refusing to be trapped, refusing to be caught inside parameters or rules or laws, and yet there is a deep logic to your work, but it's an ironic logic because it's always going to, be not this and not that, and that perhaps presents a very fascinating challenge for the viewers, looking for what is this about, what is this doing, but it's actually the playfulness of irony, not a harsh irony, but a creative irony, which plays out through materiality and procedures. But I suppose the most ironic thing that we have is our bodies, our physicality, our perversities, our joys, our pleasures, and the sense of life. So I think that...
And that we think we're forever, even though we're not.
Yeah.
It's a nice kind of sense of life to kind of know that it isn't, but it may be,
Well, I think I have to thank you enormously for your generosity and your fullness, and thank you all for coming. And now...
Thank you very much both to Griselda and to Lynda for such a wonderful exhibition.